Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Buxton Barrow Man, where I go through Buxton's history and clean up the town at the same time. Today's episode involves me doing a 10-mile walk across Buxton, showing you the pubs of past and present. I'll be giving very small amounts of history along the way. And if you've ever made any memories in any of these pubs, feel free to comment down below. Now I started my loop up at the top of Fairfield with the Devonshire Arms. Now it's not a pub anymore, it closed around 2008 to 2009 and converted into flats, but the Devonshire Arms was a public house since at least 1811. Moving on further, I couldn't remember the name, but this is the Fairfield Liberal Club that used to be here. Then further down is the 19th hole, which is close to the 18th green of the Buxton and High Peak Golf Club, which again also serves alcohol. You could count it as a pub. But the 19th hole opened in 1950 and the building was constructed in 1878 as Fern House. Going down onto the main road, there's the Bull's Head, a 3-storey stone building on Fairfield Road, which replaced the previous one, which dated back to at least 1794. But it was demolished in 1903 with the building that we have today, which unfortunately closed down not too long ago. Into the centre of Fairfield we have the Royal Forester, which was built in 1970 along with a lot of the houses in the estate, but it closed in 2011 and had been demolished and turned into houses. On Windsor Road in Fairfield there was the Swan with Two Necks, which I believe to be this cottage-like building, but I'm not particularly sure, and it was around from at least the 1820s to the 1840s, so I don't expect anyone here watching to have any memories of this pub. Just further down is the Horseshoe Inn. It was a tavern on Fairfield Road from 1871 and it closed around the late 1950s. The building is now used as offices. Just across the road is the Buxton Working Men's Club. I'm not entirely sure how old it is, but of course it's still going today. And again, not too far away is the Prince of Wales. Built in 1858 at the lower end of Fairfield Road. In the early 1900s, it served the local Marsden, then it was Thompson and Evershed Brewery, and then later became owned and run by Marsden's until its closure in 2011. And as you can see, it was converted into a funeral directors and apartments. Now the next pub, also next to each other, there is a lot on Fairfield Road here, is the Weybridge House. This was originally a private residence by the River Wye. Then it became the Midland Hotel after the railways arrived in 1863. And then once the park arrived in 1921, it was called the Ashwood Park Hotel. I forgot to mention that in the previous video. And then in the 2000s, when Wetherspoons bought it over, it returned to the original name of the private residence, Weybridge House. Up next is the Railway Hotel. It was built on Bridge Street in front of, well, the rather obvious and massive railway viaduct for the Chesterfield Brewery Company back in 1864, and the pub is now operated by Joseph Holt's Brewery. On the Spring Gardens, or what used to be known as Tidesall Lane when it was built, is the White Lion. This pub was built in 1798, and traders used to set themselves up on a cobbled yard where these buildings are today, and they use it as a base for transporting their goods. It was once briefly known as the Marquis of Hartington Arms. A Marsden Brewery ran this pub before its closure in 2011. But don't worry, this pub and the adjoining stable at the back is a Grade 2 listed building, and I believe it is in the process to being turned into apartments. Further up Spring Gardens is Milton's Head, named after the 17th century poet John Milton. Very simple stone building, dating from the early 19th century. And as I mentioned before in my High Street video, it has a fire emblem, a lead mark on the side of the building to essentially say, if it's burning, the fireman can go save it, it is insured. Continuing on, we have the Shakespeare Hotel. It was built in 1711 near the old theatre on Tidesall Lane, Spring Gardens, but it was demolished in 1926 to make way for Woolworths, which is now, today, Mountain Warehouse. Towards the end of the Spring Gardens is the Angel Inn. It was a coaching inn from at least 1773, but it was demolished In 1849, when the Royal Hotel, or the Royal Exchange, or Windsor Palace, whatever you call it, this building here was constructed. But the Windsor Palace did have a Royal Vaults public bar up until the 1950s. Another hotel bar / pub is the Grove Inn. It was another coaching inn dating back from the 1770s, and it became the Grove Hotel and was operated by Robinson's Brewery from 1937 up until its closure in 2013. The hotel bar was also previously called the Grove Vaults Bar and later Charlie's Bar from the 1980s onwards. The building is pretty much now empty except the ground floor shops. The next pub to talk about is quite a new one, Red Willow. This bar is located in the old William and Glyn's Bank, or RBS Bank building on Cavendish Circus, and it was opened in 2018 by Macclesfield's Red Willow Brewery. Another new one further down, and surrounded by lots of small little bars as well, is the Buxton Tap. The tap house is on George Street in the old courthouse buildings, which date from the mid-19th century and were previously used as council offices and as a car showroom in the mid-20th century. Buxton Brewery started operations in 2009. Directly opposite is the George Hotel. It was a Georgian spa hotel in about 1770 on, well, George Street. And at one point in time it was bought by the Duke of Devonshire in 1806. And interestingly, American ex-president Thomas Jefferson once stayed at the George. But much of the hotel was converted into apartments, then proceeded to close, and is now being turned into apartments again, with the George Inn closing in 2007. Opposite the Buxton Opera House is the Old Clubhouse, a 2-storey stone building on Water Street. It was originally called the Union Club and built in 1886, designed by architect William Radford Bryden as a gentleman's club for guests to the spa town, and it is now a Grade 2 listed building and run by Green King Brewery. Up onto the marketplace, nestled in right next to the town hall, is the King's Head. It was originally built in 1725 and is now run by Marsden's Brewery. To note, just on the outside wall there is a plaque marking the start and the finish of the Peak District Boundary Walk, which is a massive 190-mile walking trail. Also on the marketplace is New Inn, a 3-storey millstone grit building from around the 1800s, and it was originally known as the New Sun Hotel, and in the late 1840s as the New Inn and Yorkshire Commercial Hotel. It is run by Robinson's Brewery since 1838, but has recently closed, I believe within the last year. And just behind it there is also a Conservative club. Quite a notable one also on the marketplace is the Eagle, built in 1760 by the 4th Duke of Devonshire as a Georgian spa hotel. The 4-storey building replaced the earlier Eagle and Child Inn on the same site from 1592. It was a coaching inn and it was main dinner stop for the London to Manchester coaches, and it was known briefly from 1903 as the Devonshire Hotel. It is currently operated by Hyde's Brewery. Another coaching inn for those Manchester to London coaches is the White Hart, and this was built since before 1752. It's just located off the marketplace on Scarsdale. And at one point it was renamed the Scarsdale Arms in 1796. But the pub closed in 1802 and was converted into 3 houses. The ground floor of the buildings are now parade as shops, and the only thing that still remains is this doorway, the entrance to level 2. Another relatively new bar / pub, maybe kind of breaks the boundaries between pub and bar, but I didn't know what to include and what not to. But this is the Vault, and it's on the former premises of the Halifax Building Society, with an old bank vault still in place. Another coaching inn further down is the Queen's Head, and it's been a coaching inn since 1700s, so it's quite an old pub. Speaking of old pubs, we now have the Old Sun Inn, formerly the Sun and the Rising Sun. This is one of the oldest buildings in Buxton and was built in the 17th century as a coaching inn, of course. As you can see, there's an arch on the passageway to the rear coachyard, which has good stabling inscribed on it. And the inn is set back from the road so coaches could pull up outside to allow travellers to step off. And there's an interesting feature, particularly for modern day pubs to still have. There is an old small courting room where parents could observe a courting couple through windows on either side. And the interior has nice stone floors and oak panelling, and it is of course a Grade 2 listed building. I almost walked past this one, but the next one is the Dog and Partridge. This pub operated from at least 1811 as the Seven Stars and then renamed the Dog and Partridge from 1870, and it closed around 1910. The building was then subsequently an ironmonger's, and now today is a tattoo parlour. Another rather large old pub, like the Old Sun Inn, is the Cheshire Cheese. It is a 2-storey stone building from at least 1787, and is also set back from the road. As well as that, like the Old Sun Inn, it is also a Grade 2 listed building. And at one point it was owned by Samuel Mycock, that is the bloke who built Solomon's Temple. But the pub is now run by Titanic Brewery. Next up is the Swan, also known as the White Swan and formerly the Shoulder of Mutton. It is a 2-storey stone building on the corner of Church Street and Bath Street. It was built as a coaching house before 1811, and in about 1850 the inn was boycotted after a soldier was accused by the landlord for not paying for his drink. This soldier was then subsequently tied to a tree and flogged. And this pub is also a Grade 2 listed building. Right next to the Swan on Church Street is the old Wheatsheaf Inn. It was a tavern from the early 1800s to about 1950, and Marsden's Brewery owned the pub in the early 1900s up until its closure, but the building is now a holiday cottage. At Five Ways Junction is London Road Inn, which had been a pub for just over 200 years. On West Road, there was once the Baker's Arms. Now I don't know when the building was built or when it turned into a pub or whatever, but it closed in 2008 and was converted into 2 houses. Further down West Road is the Jug and Glass. And this was a pub from the early to late 1800s. The building then became a sweet shop and a wine shop and is now a private residence. But I do really like the Jug and Glass for these sort of ceramic heads that are attached just underneath the roof as cornicing. Now up to Burbage, there was once the Duke, or formerly the Duke of York Inn, on St John's Road at this big junction, and it's an old 2-storey stone building, but unfortunately has closed within the recent years and still hasn't found a new owner. And there used to be a pub right next door as well on Holmfield Road known as the Red Lion. Classic name. And this was a pub from around the 1820s to the 1920s/30s. It then became Holmfield Bakery before being demolished, and that's why I believe, although I couldn't find any pictures of it, it's where these slightly newer builds are. Back towards the centre of Buxton onto London Road is the Blazing Rag. Originally the Manchester Arms, from at least 1881 up until the 1990s, which used to be further down the road at 85, and then after 1921 moved up to where it is now at 105 London Road. Sitting where Premier Inn is today used to be Robin Hood, or originally Heath House. Heath House was bought by Marsden Brewery in 1953 and converted into a pub, keeping that name, and then it changed the name into Robin Hood from 1969 onwards. It closed in 2014, demolished and replaced by the Premier Inn you see today in 2016. And then travelling all the way up to the top of Harper, we have Parks Inn. This inn was built in the 1800s and was refurbished in 2019 and is owned by the Heineken-owned Star Pubs and Bars. And last but not least, the Hoffman Bar. Don't really know much history on it, other than it was named after the Hoffman kilns in the old Harp Ale quarry. Well, and that's pretty much it. Now, I didn't realise before I started this video just how many pubs, inns, bars, places to drink we have / used to have. So this took longer than I expected, and I didn't really expect it to be a 10-mile walk either, especially since I forgot a few walking past them. But I'm bound to have missed some information or get something wrong, so please fill in the gaps down below if you wish. And of course, like I said earlier, if you have any lovely memories from these pubs, leave it down below. Now, it wouldn't be a Buxton Barrow video without me doing some conservation or cleaning or something along those lines at the end, and this week is a continuation of last, continuing the hedge over in Hope Valley on the farm.
Send me all these, save me photographing.
Oh yeah, true actually.
Up to fucking 60.
Do 40.
You can have a 20 foot if you want, but it's a bit of an extreme gate.
But that's pretty much it. I hope you've enjoyed. Until next time, ta-ra.